In 2023, researchers at Harvard University published something that stopped me cold the first time I read it. They found that adults over 55 who reported feeling chronically cold, cold hands, cold feet, always needing more layers than everyone else, had a rate of bone density loss 34% faster than those who maintained normal body temperature. 34%. Not from the osteoporosis we already know about, from something happening in the blood vessels surrounding the bones, something chronic cold triggers, and that almost no doctor is measuring. If you're one of those people who's always cold, this video is probably one of the most important ones you'll watch this year. In a moment, we're going to dive deep into that connection between chronic cold and bones. But first, I need you to understand something almost nobody knows about body temperature after 50. Body temperature isn't fixed. It fluctuates throughout the day, responds to what you eat, how much you sleep, how active you are. And after 50, that thermal regulation capacity drops. Scientists call it impaired thermal regulation. The body loses efficiency in generating heat, distributing it, and keeping it stable. But here's what changes everything. Feeling chronically cold after 50 isn't just thermoregulation declining with age. In most cases, it has specific, identifiable, and modifiable causes. The thyroid working below optimal, as we saw in video 18, iron deficiency anemia that reduces the blood's capacity to transport oxygen and heat, insulin resistance that affects peripheral circulation, chronic dehydration, which, as we saw in the lungs video, is more common than it seems in people over 50. Any of those causes left unaddressed produces chronic vasoconstriction. Blood vessels contract in a sustained way to conserve heat for the vital organs. And that vasoconstriction has an effect on bones that most doctors aren't measuring or connecting. Today I'm going to explain that effect with real science and with what you can do to reverse it. Bones aren't inert structures. They're living, active tissue, constantly renewing itself. An older adult renews approximately 10% of their bone mass every year through a process called bone remodeling, in which cells called osteoclasts destroy old bone and cells called osteoblasts build new bone. For that process to work well, bone needs two fundamental things: nutrients, calcium, vitamin D, magnesium, vitamin K2, and blood flow. Without adequate blood flow, nutrients don't reach the bone. Osteoblasts don't have the materials to build. And the balance between destruction and construction tips toward destruction. Chronic cold produces vasoconstriction, the peripheral blood vessels, including those that supply blood to the bones of the extremities, contract. And when they contract in a sustained way, blood flow to the bone drops. Not dramatically overnight, but gradually in the same silent way most of the problems we've covered on this channel progress. And by the way, if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. A study published in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research in 2022 measured bone blood flow in adults over 55 with chronically low body temperature, defined as resting temperature below 97.2 degrees Fahrenheit. And found they had bone blood flow between 28 and 40% lower than adults with normal temperature. And that reduced blood flow correlated directly with lower bone mineral density in the hip and spine. There's another mechanism I find equally important that involves a hormone you probably don't associate with bones: norepinephrine. When the body feels chronic cold, it activates the sympathetic nervous system to generate heat. That system releases norepinephrine, which, among other things, constricts blood vessels. But norepinephrine also has direct receptors on osteoblasts, the cells that build bone. When those receptors are activated, Osteoblasts reduce their activity. The body, in heat conservation mode, literally slows down bone construction. It's as if it's saying, right now, we don't have resources to build bone. We need that heat for the vital organs. Chronic cold doesn't just make you feel uncomfortable. It's telling your body to stop building bone. But now let's get to the causes. Because if chronic cold is accelerating bone loss, finding and correcting the cause of the cold is just as important as taking calcium. The thyroid is the first suspect, and we know it well from video 18. Thyroid hormone regulates the basal metabolic rate, which is basically the speed at which your body burns energy and generates heat. When the thyroid works below optimal, even in that subclinical hypothyroidism range that standard tests don't detect, heat production drops, hands and feet get cold, basal temperature falls, and as we just saw, that sustained low temperature directly affects bone blood flow. Anemia is the second, specifically iron deficiency anemia. Hemoglobin, the protein in red blood cells that transports oxygen, also transports heat. When there's an iron deficiency, there's less hemoglobin, less heat transport to the extremities. Hands and feet are the first to feel it, and iron deficiency anemia in people over 50 is more common than it seems, especially in postmenopausal women who have impaired iron absorption and in people who take anti-inflammatories regularly that can produce silent digestive bleeding. Insulin resistance is the third, and it connects directly to video 22 about breakfast and memory. When there's insulin resistance, peripheral blood vessels lose elasticity and the capacity to dilate. Circulation in hands and feet becomes less efficient. And that deficient peripheral circulation doesn't just produce cold, it also reduces blood flow to the bones of the extremities. The connection between insulin resistance and bone loss is very well documented. A meta-analysis published in Osteoporosis International in 2023 found that adults with insulin resistance had a 31% higher risk of osteoporotic fracture, independently of other risk factors. Chronic dehydration is the fourth, and we already know it from the lungs video. Blood plasma is mostly water. When you're dehydrated, plasma volume drops, the heart pumps less blood per beat, and peripheral circulation decreases. Less peripheral circulation, more cold in extremities, less blood flow to bone. And the fifth, this one surprises a lot of people, is lack of muscle mass. Muscle is the body's main heat generator. Between 70 and 85% of the heat the body produces at rest comes from muscle. When sarcopenia reduces muscle mass, as we saw in video 14, heat production drops. The body has less heating, and that lack of heating is felt as chronic cold, especially in the extremities. See the chain? Sarcopenia produces cold. Cold produces vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction reduces bone blood flow. Reduced bone blood flow accelerates bone density loss, all connected. The signals of chronic cold are so everyday that most people normalize them completely. But seen through the lens of what we've learned today, they tell a different story. Are you always the most bundled up person in the group, even when everyone else is comfortable? That's not just being naturally cold sensitive. It means your internal thermostat isn't working well, and it's worth investigating why. Do you have cold hands and feet even when the rest of your body is warm? That's selective peripheral vasoconstriction. The body is conserving heat in the core at the expense of the extremities. It's exactly the mechanism that reduces blood flow to the bones of the hands, wrists, feet, and ankles. Do you wake up cold at night even when you're well covered? Body temperature naturally falls to its minimum between 2 and 4 a.m. But if the feeling of cold wakes you up, that indicates your baseline temperature is already below optimal, and that nighttime drop brings it to levels that interfere with sleep. Do you have frequent muscle cramps, especially in the legs at night? Nighttime cramps in adults over 50 have multiple causes: magnesium deficiency, potassium deficiency, dehydration, but they're also related to chronic vasoconstriction that reduces blood flow to the muscle during rest. And since we've established that vasoconstriction affects bone, nighttime muscle cramps in this context are one more signal that peripheral circulation isn't working well. Have you been diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis and also always feel cold? If the answer to both is yes, the connection we've explored today applies directly to you. And the conversation with your doctor should include not just calcium and vitamin D, but also a complete thyroid evaluation, iron levels, insulin resistance, and body composition. All this information has a purpose, knowing what you can actually do about it. And I want to be very specific here because the topic of feeling cold is full of superficial advice that doesn't attack the cause. The first thing is to identify and treat the cause of the cold, not just cover it with more layers. If the chronic cold comes from subclinical hypothyroidism, the solution is optimizing thyroid function with the changes we already covered in video 18. If it comes from anemia, it's iron and iron-rich foods, lean red meat, liver, legumes with vitamin C to improve absorption. If it comes from insulin resistance, it's the changes from video 22, protein at breakfast, a walk after eating. Each cause has its specific solution. More clothing just masks the symptom. Resistance exercise is the second. And in this context, the reason is different from video 14. Muscle generates heat. More muscle, more heat at rest, better peripheral circulation, more blood flow to bone. It's not just aesthetic or functional. It's thermal. Every gram of muscle you gain after 50 is a small heater your body carries with it 24 hours a day. And since muscle also pulls on bone when it contracts, generating the mechanical stimulus osteoblasts need to build, resistance exercise protects bone through two pathways at the same time: thermal and mechanical. Magnesium is the third, and in this context, the reason is also different from previous videos. Magnesium is a natural vasodilator. It relaxes the smooth muscle of blood vessel walls and improves peripheral circulation. When there's a magnesium deficiency, which is very common in adults over 50, as we've already seen, vessels stay more constricted than they should, more cold in extremities, less flow to bone. Almonds, spinach, avocado, dark chocolate, the same ones we mentioned in the skin and brain videos, but here, the mechanism is completely different. Vitamin K2 is the fourth, and this is the one that surprises most because almost nobody mentions it when talking about bones. Most people know calcium and vitamin D for bones. Very few know vitamin K2. And yet, vitamin K2 is what directs calcium toward the bone and keeps it away from the arteries, where deposited calcium forms atherosclerotic plaques. Without vitamin K2, you can take all the calcium in the world, and some of it is going to end up in your arteries instead of your bones. Where is K2? In natto, that Japanese fermented soy that is the most concentrated source. In aged cheeses, Gouda, Brie. In chicken liver. In eggs from pasture-raised hens, And I'll close with something that seems simple but has a direct and measurable impact on peripheral circulation and bone blood flow. Temperature contrast, alternating hot and cold water in the shower, 30 seconds of cold water, 1 minute of hot water, repeated 3 or 4 times, activates what's called vascular gymnastics. Blood vessels contract with cold and dilate with heat. That repeated exercise improves vessel elasticity, improves peripheral circulation, and according to a study published in the European Journal of Applied Physiology in 2021, measurably increases bone blood flow after 8 weeks of consistent practice. It's not Spartan or extreme, it's 30 seconds of cold water at the end of your shower. That's it. I want you to think about something before we close. How many times have you been told, or told yourself, I'm just a cold person. I've always been like this? How many times did you normalize it as a characteristic of yours, like eye color or height? How many times did you go out with 2 sweaters when everyone else wore one and thought, that's just how I am? Maybe that's true. Maybe you've always been more sensitive to cold. But after 50, that chronic cold, whether it's always been there or is new, isn't just a temperature preference. It's a physiological signal with real consequences for your bones, your circulation, your immune system, and your sleep quality. And the good news, and this is big, is that the causes of chronic cold after 50 are, in the vast majority, modifiable. You don't have to resign yourself to living cold. You don't have to accept that your bones are being lost faster without knowing it. You have information. You have specific causes. You have concrete interventions. I've seen patients who came to my office telling me they'd had constant cold for 10 years. Hands, feet, always the last to take off their coat. And after treating the thyroid, correcting the anemia, improving muscle mass, and adjusting diet, in 4 or 5 months they'd sit across from me with warm hands telling me, Doctor, I don't know what happened, but I'm not cold anymore. What happened is we gave back the conditions the body needs to regulate itself. Your body knows how to stay warm. It's been doing it since you were born. It just needs you to give it the right conditions to keep doing it at 60, at 70, at 80. Chronic cold isn't your identity. It's a signal, and when you learn to read it correctly, it becomes the most honest tool you have for understanding what your body needs. Share this with someone who's always cold and has normalized it as, that's just how I am. It may be the information that changes something important for them. And tell me right now in the comments, are you one of those people who's always colder than everyone else? Since when? Write it below. I want to see the pattern. Subscribe if you want more content like this. Take care of yourself.